Okay, let's go ahead and spend a couple minutes talking about the type tool in Adobe Photoshop. You can access the type tool a couple different ways. First of all, you could come over here to our toolbox, and on the right hand column you could come down to this T icon. That is the type tool, and it's defaulted to the horizontal type tool. I'm not going to select that way right now because I want to show you another convenient way. Doesn't matter what you're doing in Photoshop, doesn't matter what tool you have. If you hit T on your keyboard, it'll go ahead and take you to the type tool. Once I get the type tool, I can just go ahead and click out into my area, and I can just go ahead and type something. In this case, I'm going to go ahead and type my name. Michael is my first name, and if I hit enter, it'll take me down to a new line, and I'll go ahead and type my last name. And let me just go ahead and grab my move tool, and I'll pull it out there. Let me go ahead and bring up my default workspace so you can see my layers palette. And you notice over here in my layers palette, I have a layer, and you can see the layer is named Michael Horger. That's what I typed. You see this T, that signifies that this is a type layer. It's a text layer. If I ever want to select my text that is on that layer, an easy way to do it is just to come down to this layer, double click on the T, and you'll notice now that I go up here into my work area that text has been selected. So that's an easy way to get that by clicking the T. Let me go ahead and grab the text type tool, and I want to go over a couple things up in your tool options bar. First of all, you have this little icon right here that lets you change the text orientation. We started off with the horizontal type tool, so I typed horizontally from left to right. After I typed something, I could go ahead and click on that, and it will change it to the vertical type tool. Now, a lot of times you don't want to do that with double lines. Maybe you want to do that with just one line of text. In this case, you see it puts Horger before Michael, but I could go ahead and click on it again and take it back. The next thing you see is your font. One thing that's nice about Photoshop is you can preview fonts pretty easily. I could come down here to my layers palette and just double click on this T icon to select my text. And then if I go up here and I click inside of this little drop down menu, so I highlight it in blue, you see now I'm in Times New Roman. I could use the arrow keys on my keyboard to go up and down through all the different selections of type. And you see on my screen I can get a good preview of what those selections would look like. So let me go ahead and just keep going through some more so you can see that. Or of course I could always just grab the drop down menu and go through and choose what I want. There are thousands and thousands of fonts out on the internet that you can download and put onto your computer. So fonts are kind of an endless choice, whatever you want. Let me go ahead here and let me go to a basic font. I'm going to go to Times New Roman. And the reason I want to do that is because our next icon right here, our next selection, lets us make some choices on the font. I could stay with a regular font, I could choose italic, I could bold it, or I could go to bold italic. So you have those options there. The next option up here in the tool options bar is your font size. Once again, I want to go ahead and I want to select my text. And when you pull your little drop down menu, you could just choose whatever. You know, there I went to 14, here's 60, here's 72. If you want something greater than 72, you could simply click in there and you can type whatever you want. In this case, I typed 150. Now, one thing I want you to notice, you notice how when I type 150, Michael and Horger start to blend together. We're going to talk about how you can control that here in a couple minutes. The same thing happens if I go to a small font. Let's say I go to 14. You notice there's a great difference between Michael and Horger. And in a moment I'll show you how you can control that. Let me go ahead and take this back. I'm going to make it 48 for now, so it's big enough for you to see, but we have a little bit too much space in there. Another thing we have is right here we have our anti-aliasing method. We'll talk about that later on, but you have some drop-down choices. You have sharp, you have crisp, you have strong, and you have smooth. Basically, that just deals with the edges of your letters and what they look like, and we'll talk about that more later on. Just like any other program, you have your align functions up here. We could left align, and you notice the M and the H line up. We could center align. Michael's a little bit longer of a word, so you see on each end it's a little bit longer. Or we could right align. The L and the R line up. I'm going to go ahead and leave this center align. Here we have the color selector. After I type my font, I can just go in and choose whatever color I want. Let's go ahead and choose red here, and I'll say OK. And now you see that we have a red font. Now we have a couple interesting icons up in the tool options bar. This T with kind of like the bended line under it, that is our warp text icon. Let me go ahead and click on that. I'm going to pull it over here so you can see what I'm doing. And you see right now there is no style. My style is none. But I have this whole drop down menu of things that I want to do. For instance, I could come down here and I could choose rise, and you notice that Michael and Horger starts to rise. Now I have these selection areas where I can make it rise less. I could even make it rise in the negative numbers so it would go down. So let me just give it a little bit of rise here. I have some horizontal distortion options. I have vertical distortion options. I can kind of do whatever I want to do with these numbers and go ahead and play with it. And that's the rise technique. There's a bunch of different options in there. Mostly this is one of those things that you just kind of want to go ahead and play with and see what you like, what looks good to you. So let me go ahead and just say OK and leave it like that. Kind of got an interesting little look going on there. The next icon over, let me go ahead and select my text, is a very important one. This is the character palette. And let me go ahead and bring that up. A lot of the same options we had earlier are found in the character palette. I could go in here, for instance, and I could change my font, and you can see it cycles through over here on the screen just like before. Let me go ahead and go back to Times New Roman. We have the same options as far as italic, bold, italic, and so forth. This is the size of your font right here. You notice up in the tool options bar it's 48. Here again it's 48. But now is where we start to get into some of the interesting options. This first one, set the leading. What leading is it's the distance between your lines. So the distance between the bottom of Michael and the top of Horger, that space right there, that's called the leading. Right now you see it's at 72 point. If I would go in and I would make it smaller, and let's go ahead and make it 48 point, you notice Horger gets closer to Michael. I'm using 48 font, so that's kind of a natural fit right there. If I would go and make it like, let's say, 30 font, you notice Horger starts to blend into Michael. There's also an auto selection that kind of looks at what you have chosen for your font size, and it creates an automatic distance. So anytime you need to increase or decrease the distance between words, you can use the leading option in your character palette. The next option right below it is your tracking of selected characters. That's the distance between letters, the distance between the M and the I, for instance. It's defaulted at 0, but you can go ahead and pull that down, and you notice you have both positive and negative numbers. I'm going to go ahead and here and click on 50, and you can notice that all of the letters got a little bit further apart, and actually we'll make it extreme here. I'll go to 200, and you notice how the letters get further and further apart. If I would go up into the negatives, they would get closer, and if I would go to like negative 100, you can see that they're almost on top of each other. So you can do that. Let me go ahead and go back to 0. Then we have right here, we have our vertical scale. When we choose something as a certain font size, in this case we have 48 font size, both the vertical and horizontal scales are defaulted to 100. But let me go ahead here and let me, first of all, put Michael and Horger back onto the same line. And let me go ahead and get rid of our warped text. Let me just go ahead and go back to none so I can show you some things with this. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to move Michael Horger right up to the top of the page. And actually, let me go ahead and increase our font size to, let's go to 66. And I'll go ahead and I'll hit enter in there. So let's just imagine, for instance, that this is the exact height that I need my font size to be. I can't go below this point. Maybe there is a picture down here that I can't start blending into. I need it to be this exact height. But I would want my font to go from the left edge to the right edge, so I want it to be a little bit wider. Well, there's a couple things I can do. I could increase my font size, and I'll go ahead and go to like 72, but that would make it a little too tall vertically. So I could go to my vertical scale and I could just make it less than 100%. In this case, I'll make it 90%. And you notice it got a little shorter. I'll make it real dramatic. I'll go ahead and I'll type 10%, and you can see what happens to the words. But I could just kind of manipulate it a little bit by making it 90%. Or I could leave that at 100%. And if you remember a moment ago, our font size was 66. I could go ahead and go back to that. I could go over to our horizontal scale, and I could just make it wider. Instead of 100%, maybe I could make it 115. And you notice Michael and Horger gets wider. So I can mess with the size of my font without changing the font size. I can just make it wider or taller based on the percentages. We don't really mess with baseline shift. We're not going to really worry about that. You also see here you have the text color. If I wanted to change this color to green, for instance, I could go ahead and there we have green. And let me go ahead and step backwards on that back to red. Then we have all these different icons down here. And these are just basically the same icons that we saw up in our tool options bar. We have our bold option. We have our italics. This is all caps if I wanted something in all caps. Now, needless to say, you see Michael and Horger goes off the screen, so I would have to adjust my horizontal scale. This is small caps. This is an interesting one. I'm going to go ahead and grab my type tool, and I'm going to create some more text. I'm going to go ahead and just type A2. Okay, and I'll go ahead and bring this out into the middle of the screen. And what I could do is I could just highlight the 2. Let me just go ahead and highlight the number 2 here. I'm not going to highlight A, I'm just going to highlight 2. And I could go to Superscript, and I could go ahead and click on that. And you notice what happens to the number 2. Or I could highlight the number 2. And I could go to my subscript. And there you notice it takes the number 2 and it puts it down in a subscript menu. We also have the underline option. If I wanted to underline something, I could go ahead and click on that and underline it. Now you might ask, how did it know to underline A2 and not Michael Horger? Well, it depends on the layer I have selected down here in the layers palette. I have A2, so it's going to go ahead and underline that. Let me take the underline away there. And then you also have the strike through option if I want to do strike through something. So those are some things that you can do. The final aspect we're going to talk about with the type tool are our layer styles. And before we go to that, let me go ahead and delete this A2 layer by dragging it down to the trash can. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to put my name back onto 2 separate lines. And let me go ahead and change our leading back to 72 so it looks kind of nice. And I'm just going to move this down to the middle of the screen. And apparently I have a space in here. Nope. There we go. Okay, so there we go. We have Michael Horger right in the middle of our screen. I can go ahead and select my text, and this Add Layer Style menu gives me all kinds of options to do things to this text. For instance, let's say I wanted to add an outline. I could click on Stroke. Now it defaults to a red outline, so it's kind of hard to see here, but let me go ahead and change my outline color to black, and you'll see what we have there. We have a nice red text with a black outline, and I could go ahead and say OK. And of course, you know we have all these different options in the stroke menu. What I'm going to do here is I'm just going to kind of click on a bunch of different options just to kind of show you some things they do. I'm not going to mess too much with the options inside of each. I'll let you do that. But if I wanted to add drop shadow, you notice it puts a shadow around the text as I check or uncheck the drop shadow effect. You can put an inner shadow inside of the text. You can have glow options, inner glow, outer glow, bevel and emboss. You notice what it does to the text there. Satin isn't one we use much, but color overlays, different colors. Gradient overlays is a real popular one. If I go ahead and double click and bring up my gradient options, here I have a black-gray gradient, and you know notice on the screen that gradient shows up there, and I could choose different gradients. I have my angle option here where I can select the angle of the gradient and so forth. And I have pattern overlay as well, which is an overlay that I can put onto my text. So what you can do is you can use these layer styles to really dress up your text. In this case, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to add a drop shadow here, and let me make my drop shadow a little bit bigger and give it a little bit more distance from my text so you can see it really well. So I've taken some basic text and I've added gradient overlay, I've added a black outline, and I've added some drop shadow. So it looks pretty interesting. What I want you guys to do, and you are going to get a grade for this, is I want you just to open up a blank document, and you can just do that by going up to the File menu and selecting New. And let's just keep the size at the default 7 inches by 5 inches and keep the background at white. And once you go ahead and open that up, we'll just go ahead and type your name. You can grab the type tool and just go ahead and type your name out here onto the blank canvas. And then I want you to mess around with it. You can choose whatever font you wish. You can make it bold or italicized or regular font, whatever you choose. You can choose your font size and all those different options, colors, and everything. What I do want to see is I want to see you add some warped text to your name. And once you get your name warped, I want you to then add some layer styles. If you want to add an outline, that's fine. Gradient overlay, drop shadow, whatever you want to do. I just want to see you do something interesting with your name so you get kind of an interesting look going to it. And actually, I'm going to go ahead and warp my name here. Maybe I'll do the fisheye. That's always kind of an interesting one, and we'll just kind of mess around with it a little bit here, and something like that. So I'm not really looking for anything in particular. I just want you to play around a little bit with it to get used to some of the different text options. When you are done, I'm going to pass around my flash drive, and I'm going to have you save it to my flash drive, and you'll get a grade for this assignment.